welcome to another episode of AI Unveiled. I'm your guest host, Kate Reznykova, partner here at N47. Today, we're excited to chat with Ulrik Hansen, co-founder of Encord. Encord is a leading platform for data curation and labeling, automating the data development process for companies building AI models and applications from robotics to healthcare and everything in between. Encord is fully multimodal, supporting image, video, audio, text, and documents, and is powering AI teams at Synthesia, block safety, and more. In this episode, we will discuss Ulrik's founder's journey, technical challenges of scaling AI data solutions, and what it takes to stand out in the ever-evolving AI ecosystem. We'll also touch on his visions for AI's future, including the transformative potential of multimodal systems, reasoning models, and autonomous agents. Let's jump right in. Ulrik, welcome to the show, first of all.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start by getting to know you a bit better.
Yes. So I'm the Ulrik, the Danish part of the co-founding team of Encord. I grew up in a small town outside of Copenhagen in Denmark. I started coding at a pretty young age, spent most of my teenage years building different types of applications that I threw online. I was an early contributor to open source. So I was very interested in sort of technology and also in business. I started my first business when I was 18, just selling software and websites to like local businesses. So that's sort of led me into finance, because I guess naively thought that to build a business you had to have some finance experience. So I started my career at JP Morgan in London on the trading floor. Did that for a couple of years, but really had a strong itch to going back into building. So decided to leave my job towards the end of the 2010s when the first AI models came out and actually started working. So many of the listeners probably know AI has been through a bunch of hype cycles and winters beforehand. But around 2017, 2018, it was starting to become obvious for those who are kind of looking closely that some of these systems were actually starting to deliver real value in the real world, which I thought was very exciting. So I decided to leave my job, do a computer science master's at Imperial College in London, where I worked on a number of different types of deep learning projects, one of which ended up becoming the seed of the idea for founding Encord.
What inspired you to create this platform? Was there a particular moment or realization that sparked the idea?
Yeah, so both Eric, my co-founder, and I, we both worked on big data systems for AI ML before it was hot, I like to tell people. So I was working on deep learning projects at Imperial, doing research, and Eric has a background in high-frequency trading. So he worked on big data systems. So he put thousands of models into production that were trading stocks, futures, ETFs, and the like. And I think what we realized, both of us talking to each other, is that for building these different types of deep learning systems, we spend most of our time on data cleaning, data management, data annotation. So basically getting the right data to feed into the model and figuring out how the model would perform relative to the data that we had been feeding it. So we saw the world in a very similar way and thought there was a very exciting opportunity to build a company in the AI data space. So that's ultimately what we ended up doing.
Awesome. And for listeners who may not be familiar with Encord, could you give us a quick overview what exactly Encord do and what problem does it solve for companies?
Sure. So we're essentially building Encord to help companies turn their unstructured multimodal data, so things like images, video, audio, text, medical images, into AI. So whether you're developing models to diagnose cancer or to drive a car, you need to streamline your data pipelines to get the right high quality data into your model and take all the wrong data out of the model. So we've essentially broken that problem down to its three principal components, which is data creation, annotation, and model evaluation. And we build a platform that solves all those three end to end. So for example, we work with a hospital in the US called Mass General. They been working on different types of vascular ultrasound projects. They were able to increase the performance of a vascular ultrasound model by 20%. And for a model that's making predictions every minute, imagine the excess numbers of ultrasounds that analyze correctly versus the baseline. So AI has having a huge impact in the world, and we're really facilitating that with a very powerful system.
It sounds like a quite complex problem to solve. And I was wondering, it must come with its fair share of technical challenges. What were some of your biggest hurdles you've encountered in building the platform?
Yes. So I think there are like many different like technical challenges you have to overcome. So first and foremost, like you first have to figure out like what is it actually that people will be interfacing with and using. So even like down to the sort of like initial user design, right? Like figuring out like what are the workflows that you want to facilitate. I would say like that's more on the usability side. So less of like hardcore technical challenge, but I think that's always a complex problem when you're building developer tooling and products to like make a system and a platform and a user interface and an SDK and APIs that people actually enjoy using. And I think that's like where we've looked at like Stripe, for example, right? They build like fantastic APIs. It's like sort of a North Star and like thinking about like, okay, how do we really design like the best possible APIs to make these different types of data pipelines or workflows much better and more efficient. On the more technical challenges side, I think a lot of the work that we do with dealing with these massive data sets, and I think, thinking about like where AI is going, right? These data sets are only getting bigger, has a lot to do with just like pure scale. So there are like two principal, I think, challenges with that. So one is like being able to query the data and then searching through the data. And the other one is just like orchestrating the compute power. So we have a bunch of these like embedding based models that run embeddings over all the data so that we can unlock these like different types of like use cases around like natural language search, like finding edge cases and other things. So we spend an enormous amount of time just building the system to scale, because some of our customers, we work with some of the largest generative AI labs in the world. We spend a lot of time as a company investing heavily in understanding like these like different types of scaling problems when it comes to data. And that's naturally something that is very interesting for engineers to work on. And that's something that I think is like attracted like a certain type of caliber of engineer. That's something that we're incredibly excited about, because we are like one of the only platforms, if not the only one, that can handle the scale of AI data, especially given the density of these like unstructured data types like video. That sets up really well for the future of these like multimodal AI systems that are now really starting to kick off.
I love what you said about being one or the only one company that does this kind of stuff. And I would love to touch on that and talk more about what is really Encord's secret sauce. What does make Encord's product so special? Because we know there are other companies working in this field, and I'd love to hear your perspective on what makes platform more efficient and more intelligent compared to traditional approaches.
That's a great question. So I think building a scalable data infrastructure for like the AI age really requires you to innovate on numerous fronts. So I think one that we just talked about was scaling, but there are certainly also other ones. So we've invested a lot in trying to understand like how we can minimize the amount of manual annotation, for example, that someone would do when they are enriching some data for a labeling project. So we've like really tried to break down the problem into sort of different nodes, if you will, and try to build composable workflows that lets you automate the annotation process every step of the way. You could do that by leveraging priors. So if you have like big models, for example, that you use for other things, and you're building a smaller model, you can implement that to do the auto annotation. I think we're seeing a similar trend in a lot of LLM development now, where you're using sort of like bigger models to teach smaller models. So I think that's something that is very exciting, and something we've rolled out and are quite proud of in what we've built. We've also spent a lot of time on just trying to understand, for like a given model that you're building, how do you actually get the best set of diverse data and feed it into the model. So it's more of a research problem, which is also something we pride ourselves in doing. So we, for example, like build better diversity sampling techniques for data creation. So getting an understanding of like what is the best kind of diverse data set that you should be leveraging to make the performance of your model better. Which inevitably like is also a very hard problem, right? Because you're trying to filter through and sort huge data sets. And you're also trying to get the model to basically tell you where it's going wrong and like what data it needs to improve itself, which is a very difficult problem, as I'm sure a lot of the listeners will be familiar with if they've deployed any sort of language model or any other application in the wild. And for doing all of that, we need to scale this up. Again, going back into the point around scale, we do these things at petabyte scale. So you need some very talented engineers that have very, very strong understandings of like how you can do like low-level database programming, for example, to facilitate these types of applications. And as like AI becomes more, or like as AI proliferates, right, and like becomes more ubiquitous, I think we'll see even more of this in the future. So just having the strong foundations is something that I think is critically important when you're building these AI systems. Ultimately, right, the objective for us is to have our customers end up with error-free data that is perfectly aligned with the problem that they're trying to solve. And right now, at least, I mean, maybe in the future it will replace our SaaS platform with like just an API that can tell people. But right now, like it requires like a big machinery of different features and different tools to be able to do that effectively.
This sounds like you built something really special, and I could see how much effort you've put into this. And as a team, you guys really worked on every technicality, and it's amazing to see. And I think, talking more about the company building aspect, your journey from an associate at JP Morgan to co-founding a tech company like Encord, it's quite a pivot. How did you experience in finance inform your approach to running a company? If it did at all?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that I think about quite frequently, and it's also something that we've been asked by quite a few investors in the past. And I think starting a career in finance, of course, like it is like an industry that attracts like a certain type of person, right? So we have a lot of like other ambitious people, which is great because it kind of helps you push yourself forward. I think tech is similar in that vein. But like thinking about like what you do on the trading floor, right? Like you're really processing vast quantities of information. So you're constantly seeing what's going on in the market, and you constantly have to reassess like your view of like something, right, based on like new information. So I think a lot of what startup founders get wrong, right, is that they fail to like listen, update their mental model of like a specific like market or like the product or whatever it might be, based on like some new emergent information, right? Like they kind of get stuck in the original idea without like pivoting their thought process and like how they're thinking about a certain problem. So I think like given that you are just wrong a lot when you're doing that, it's something that's really helped me to like not hold my beliefs too tightly, right? So if a new, let's say like a new model comes out, we should update our thinking about like what that means for like the broader ecosystem. And I think what we've ultimately done as a company is like, I think both Eric and I like think in a very similar way in that regard, is that we've kind of like taken that to the extreme, right? And thought about like, what are the invariants of AI development? So like, what are the things that will always be true, no matter what happens with the development of models? I think you can probably safely assume that the models will continue to get better. You can probably assume that compute will continue to get cheaper. You can probably also assume that there is a general sort of shift from training to inference, in that a lot more companies in the future will be leveraging infrastructure versus training infrastructure. You can also probably safely assume that people will always have a need to be able to understand where the model is going wrong once it's deployed in the production environment, and they will like always need some way to manage and store the data to provide the models with context of like the specific problem space that they're operating in. So these sort of like AI invariants are like really what guides our decision making day to day. And I don't think, going back to your question, that we would have like thought about this in a similar way had we not had the experience of like being humbled so frequently, both Eric and I, like on a trading floor as we have. So I think that's really been helpful, and actually building up the company.
it's great to kind of start something, but I think what's more difficult is to actually scale that into something tangible and build a company out of idea. So I feel like as Encord has grown, what are some biggest lessons that you guys learn along the way? I love the story about you and Eric being in his parents' house preparing for a demo day at YC. I think it's been quite a while since then. Uh, what have you learned since that week, building the prototypes up until now?
Yeah, so we went through Y Combinator in the winter of 21, which is, I guess, like just over 3 years ago now. And to your point, Kate, yeah, we were sitting in Eric's parents' dining room. It was just the two of us. We were, remember, coding on the weekends and then like doing cold calls to prospective customers during the week to try and get as much revenue through the door before demo day. Of course, like since then we've raised a few rounds of funding, and I think for each of the sort of like stages, right, the problems are slightly different. So after the seed and the Series A, like our main problem was really figuring out like how to scale up founder-led sales. So Eric and I did founder-led sales. We got to the kind of classic $1 million of ARR before we started like thinking about like transitioning out of doing that. That was probably the most difficult transition that we had to make. And I think if I were to do it again, I probably would have approached it a little bit differently. So the first thing really in scaling is like figuring out how you generate pipeline. And again, I'm just talking about like scaling Encord from like a business standpoint, not necessarily an engineering standpoint, because I think engineering is separate, and we can also talk about that a little bit more afterwards. But on the business side, right, the first thing was really to figure out how to generate pipelines, just getting repeatability in like the opportunities that you get in, so that you have some deal flow that you can like have your salespeople go after, right? So before like deal flow, it doesn't really make sense to actually like hire any salespeople to close the deals, right? Because if you have the deal flow initially, you can close the deals yourself. So that was the first thing we had to figure out. The way that people do that at the beginning, right, is typically they hire like SDR, so they invest in some marketing initiatives for us. We started with investing in SDRs that had a few kind of false starts, and then we finally like figured out like what would work on that front. I think the main takeaway from that experience was that it's generally better to hire generalists in the beginning as part of like the early pipeline generating journey. And as soon as we had some channels that were working, it was clear like what we should double down on and like invest more in, and which ones we should leave behind. And I think as the company has grown, right, we've started hiring more specialists that have like more deep domain knowledge. Whereas like in the early days, there's really just figuring out like what channels we should be investing in the first place, which I think a generalist is more suited for. And I think another big lesson for us is also just people. I think your gut is almost always right on the people that we hire, right? So I think in the beginning, I think we made some early hiring mistakes especially on the sales side, right, where we probably hired some people that weren't well suited to work at an early stage company. They might not have an experience like selling a technical product before. And whatever your hunch is with people, like as a kind of like first time technical founder, right? Like you don't really know these things until you've actually felt them on your own body. But that's just again a general like word of not caution, but like just something to think about. So now this is on the business side. So we can also talk about the product engineering side for a second. And I think product engineering is also very difficult because you start off by like doing founder-led product development. So transitioning out of founder-led product development is probably easier than transitioning out of founder-led sales, because the work is like more obvious, right? Like that, okay, you want to build a certain feature, you need to write certain code to do that. Whereas like with go-to-market, you don't really know what's going to work before you start doing it. So I think transitioning out of founder-led product development also comes with its own challenges. So one of the things that I think is really difficult to figure out is actually like how do you scale productivity in a product and engineering organization linearly with headcount, right? And I think this is where it gets really tricky, and you have to like do a lot of thinking around like how you want to structure the squads, how you want to like structure your release process, how you want to do like all these things to make sure that your product like gets out into the hands of customers as quickly as possible without like compromising on quality. And I don't think that there's like a single right answer to this. I think it's just like something you have to kind of do with trial and error. I think it's something that we're still like figuring out on our side, and like how do we actually do this in the most effective way. I think we've done well, but we definitely have like more learnings and more work to do on that front.
Honestly, I love this wholesome view on how the business side, the engineering side scales. I think that that's two things that any founder will struggle in the beginning, and I love the fact that your advice actually comes from a personal experience. But in the industry in general, there is no lack of advice. There's a lot of advice for founders out there. Everyone tends to give some guidance here and there. And I'm sure you've been given a lot in your career as well. And do you think there is some advice that should be ignored, that's been frequently given, that you think maybe shouldn't be hyped or in the spotlight?
That's a great question. I think one of the big learnings for us, right, is that a lot of the early days, I think people are advised to like over-index on technology and like the product, right? There's like this kind of classical saying that like, oh, first time founders focus on product, second time founders focus on distribution, and third time founders like focus on retention, right? But I think that's like sort of missing the point of how much of a tech company involves just managing relationships with people. And like really like your company, like all an organization is really just a collection of people that are working on a specific objective towards like some common shared mission. And I think, now thinking about like my role and also Eric's role in the company, like most of our time is really spent just like thinking about like people, resources and staffing, which is somewhat counterintuitive, especially like in the age of AI, right? Where like we should be thinking more about artificial intelligence than like adding more headcount. So I think that's an interesting thing to like think about. And it'll be very interesting to see how things go in the future with AI, right? I'm on the personal firm belief, and this is a bit of a tangent to the question, but I am of the firm belief that I think AI will amplify and not replace humans. I think like throughout human history, right, we've invented tools to make us more productive. I think AI is really like another kind of tool in that toolbox, which will help like unlock like new areas of productivity. And still like the sort of relationship management and like building up the team and like building the culture and all these things, like will remain as relevant in the future as they are now and as they have been in the past. So I think that's something that probably don't like hear that often, but something that we definitely like think about quite a bit.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's a very sober and realistic opinion about the current state of affairs, frankly. And the more I think, and the more you talk about it, it's absolutely clear that building a company is a tremendous amount of work, and it obviously comes not without its challenges. And I imagine there are always challenges, but sometimes setbacks, I think, can be unexpected blessings. But I'm really curious about your experience. Was there a particular roadblock or challenge that, in hindsight, when you look back, turned out to be a positive turning point for Encord?
I think the biggest roadblocks that we've always encountered have always like been in like, I guess, like entering the new frontier, right? So like again, like being a technical founder, we had to like learn how to do sales, right? Like we had to learn how to do marketing, we had to learn how to like do fundraising, we had to learn how to do operations and all these things. I think like most of the initial stumbling blocks that we have had as always like learning. I mean, initially like you have to learn something new, right? And I think for us, like the biggest learnings probably came in the transition from doing founder-led sales into having a sales team that can like do the work for you, right? So like I think that's really when you feel like you found product market fit, right? That's when you have a sales team that's closing deals where you don't necessarily like know or understand like what the customers that you're closing are doing. And I think ultimately like the success of a startup and a company, right, like really comes down to like how quickly you can iterate on those learnings. So that's something that we spend quite a bit of time on, just thinking about is like, okay, can we move faster? Can we iterate faster? Because inevitably, like the more iterations you can run in a certain period of time, the more opportunities you will have for being successful at whatever it is that you're doing. So that's like been our guiding principles, or guiding principle based like since day one. And like try as many things as possible, iterate quickly, like get stuff into the hands of customers. And I think ultimately, like the more times you do that, again, like the more opportunities you will have to be building something or doing something that that works. And obviously, like we're still like early on in the journey, right? So like we will have plenty more roadblocks in the future and plenty more learnings. But I think we've like really set up the organization that we have and like the types of people that we've hired to be able to like learn incredibly quickly. So being like a learning organization, like basically like a learning machine that can like overcome these roadblocks. Hopefully, like with less scar tissue than we've had in the past. But certainly like make sure that we just iterate on problems quickly and we try and get through things as a team.
Yeah, that sounds quite interesting. I can totally feel, full founders mode implemented in what you just said. And it kind of reminds me of a quote that I believe belongs to someone at Intercom, which says, "Shipping is your company's heartbeat." And I feel like this perfectly fits in the strategy you guys built at Encord, and just the cultural thing amongst your team members, amongst the salespeople, and just something that I feel like you both religiously follow, which is exciting. And we've talked about it, how it's all started, and you got your first customers. And then at some point, there was a moment when you should have raised your first capital. So, and then as you scaled, I feel like raising capital is a huge milestone in any company's growth journey. And what I'm really curious that, going from Series A to B requires a really well thought strategy, because I think things are becoming more serious at that stage. Were there any key decisions that you made along the way that prepared Encord for that success in terms of going from Series A to B, now that you look back after the Series B is done?
Yeah, I think the funding milestones are interesting because they always like represent an evolution and like the types of problems that you're facing. So I think at the kind of Series A stage, you have something that's working. Typically, like you found like some product market fit, but like the next challenge there is like really figure out how you like start to scale it up, right? Like how do you build repeatability into your sales motion? How do you like make sure that the product like can stand on its own and like doesn't break down like every 2 seconds? And I think like once you make it to the Series B, like you have to have those things like working, right? Like the company should be operating smoothly and should be like more of a kind of complete machine. And you have to have repeatability in your sales process. You have to have some account executives that can like sell the product with like very limited oversight or like even without any oversight. And I think as you kind of progress, like I think it becomes more of that like building the machine, right? So I think one of the things that we are focused on now as a company is like building the hiring engine. So a lot of the people that we have now, we're a team of about coming up to 80 people, is really a kind of like a concoction of people that we've like gotten from referrals. It's people that we found through our own networks. And I think like the next challenge for us is like really figuring out like how do we scale the team and like maintain the same high bar for the company. And I think that's something that we'll probably like get hopefully get right. But we'll definitely have some learnings on that front in the coming year or so.
And just like riding on the back of what you just said, I think scaling was the path that you had to go through, and I'm sure you must have received plenty of feedback from investor, frankly, including myself and my own thought. How did you prioritize which feedback to act on and when to trust your instinct as a founder? What was that decision making process?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think we always like try and like think about things from first principles. So I think, in the early days, like when you are like not quite ready to scale yet, I think you can end up burning like a lot of capital, right? And like just hiring people for the sake of hiring people, because you think that, okay, like if we hire like a 10-person engineering team to like just, work on whatever new product or something, or like if you hire a sales team, without like actually having the, let's say like the kind of organic demand, like either a strong pull from like the market or a strong pull from our existing customers on like a certain set of features. I think a lot of those things can kind of fall flat. So we've like tried to build the company in like a more sustainable way, in that like we haven't, I think, ever fallen victim of like overhiring, like probably quite the contrary. We've probably like underhired in some areas in the past. And it's always like very difficult to like understand or see like, when you like might be under investing in something, like when you should be investing more. We generally have a tendency to kind of keep stay leaner, which like sometimes I think probably like we should invest like more into like certain, you know new product development or features or whatever it might be, because we could have like moved faster in something. And I think getting that right is extremely difficult, but it's something that we always like kind of bring back to kind of first principles thinking and thinking about how we want to like scale something out. So I think for like the hiring engine, I think that's something that we only really started investing in seriously earlier this year, when it was clear that the referrals from existing employees and like my own sort of like sourcing and like all the different hiring platforms, all these things were not really going to scale to the demands of like all the customers we're bringing in, to all the new like use cases we want to support and all these things. So I think that's been a big learning for us. It's something that we're quite excited about having like started really building out this year.
I really love that you put your personal experience in front when you were answering those questions. I think the learnings will be really interesting for lots of founders out there. But right now, I'd love to switch the focus a little bit and maybe talk a bit more about the future of AI and Encord's vision of that future. AI is moving at the rapid pace, and we're all watching to see what's happening next. In your opinion, what are the next big milestones AI needs to reach? Where do you see Encord's role in that future?
I think the future of AI is incredibly exciting, because I think we're just like scratching the surface of like what the technology will be able to do going forward. I think there are like three main areas that we think quite a bit about. The first one is multimodal, so multimodal AI systems. Second one is reasoning, and the third one is agents. And I think all these three areas, like we're seeing like tremendous amounts of innovations. So I think multimodal models, you guys have seen GPT-4o. I think we'll see GPT-5 with like more multimodal capabilities coming out like pretty soon, which is unlocking a whole new set of like use cases and opportunities. I think we're seeing a huge renaissance in robotics, for example, made possible by the innovations in like multimodal AI systems. We've been doing multimodal for like a very long time. So we're very excited to see that the market is like starting to really catch up. And we're starting to see a lot of these like applications actually making it into production. On the reasoning side, I think we're equally excited, right? I think most of the listeners might have tried the GPT-01 model that OpenAI pushed out. I think we're starting to see like Anthropic and some of the other big developers like also spending much more time on reasoning. Reasoning will be obviously key to like unlocking a lot of these like more cerebral types of professions. And I think there, like you'll probably like leverage like some of these systems to do kind of, they'll collaborate with you on like solving like problems that like require like long reasoning chains. I think that's incredibly exciting, because that's like a field that has like, never been touched probably by a technology like really before, right? So I think that's the first time we're starting to see that technology is having a real impact in like how to reason about things. I think the third one, agents, is also like an area that we've worked with for quite some time. We work with some of the largest robotic process automation companies in the world. They've obviously been doing building agents for quite some time. We're seeing a huge uptake in different types of web agents. So agents that can like solve like day-to-day problems for you, right? Like you could be like, oh, at like 2:00, please order me some groceries from like Safeway so that I could be home on time. You don't have to like go through all the SaaS applications, all these things. You just enter a prompt and it'll be able to do it for you. Now, I think the interesting thing for us, right, is that like all of these different applications, they are like just multimodal in nature, and will require like very sophisticated data development infrastructure and tooling, which like puts us in a very great position to be able to continue to like innovate with the customer and like I think be at the forefront of AI development, which I think is what gets me excited and like really makes me excited to go to work every day.
No, I absolutely agree. And I love that you mentioned multimodal. I think multimodal is a big AI trend. And I really know that Encord has an exciting products around that. Some of that's already released, some of it's coming soon. Could you tell us a bit more about how Encord is positioning itself with a multimodal?
Yeah, so we at Encore started focusing. There are like a few big areas of AI, right? Like let's say the two main ones are sort of language models and computer vision. To put it sort of like in simplistic terms, we started with vision, and vision is a very very high bandwidth way of communicating versus text, very low bandwidth way of communicating. So we have been positioned for the sort of like multimodal wave for quite some time. And we started like investing quite early on in like building out tooling and infrastructure to support the different types like multimodal AI applications that started coming out maybe like about 2 years ago, with like stable diffusion coming out with like text image, text video, visual language models. You could do like captioning. I think like now we're starting to see like more complex types of multimodal systems, because we have AI models that are now like starting to entering the physical world. So like we're seeing like again like a huge uptake in like robotics companies, right, where you have a robot that needs to be able to navigate in a not just like 2-dimensional but like 3-dimensional environment. They have to be able to like understand like depth dynamics and all these things if they are to like be really really like productive and add value to our like day-to-day lives. So yeah, we're extremely excited about that because we have been like thinking about this for like at least a couple of years, and we've been like building out the tooling and the infrastructure with this for a couple of years. So I think we're extremely excited to see what's next, and I doing very very closely with our customers to make sure that we have the best possible product that could support them in their journey to become multimodal.
Looking ahead, there's whole Gen AI world out there, and there's lots of different products, lots of different use cases floating. And every day I feel like every time I open the internet, there's another use case. And what do you think are going to be the generative AI use cases that are going to have the biggest and like truly transformative impact on the society, on the technologies? Like if I'm talking about your personal beliefs, right?
So I think it's important to kind of like disentangle like economic value versus like personal value. So I think like economic value, I think a lot of it is going to be generated from like it's just like automating like different types of like business processes, right? Like imagine like how much time is spent on just like doing like data entry like to this day, right? Or like how much time that you're spending in like Excel if you're working in like a financial analyst job and like just like moving things around or like doing the same thing over and over again. So I think like agents will like replace a lot of the work. Similarly, like for autonomous cars, it would be interesting to see what the actual economic impact of that is, right? Because you're basically like displacing a whole sort of like portion of the economy. Is like you're just freeing up an immense amount of time. Now the question is like, what are people actually going to be doing with that time? Now that like the Uber drivers like they won't be Uber drivers anymore. They have to like put their time into something else. Again, I think it's unclear like what the economic impact or benefit of that will be, but I could definitely see it just like saving a lot of time, which will inevitably like free up human time to more productive resources, which again like has happened like multiple times over the course of history, right? Like first it was like the Industrial Revolution, people didn't have to like pull around the horse carts anymore because we got like tractors and cars and other stuff. Like we got the steam engine, right? I think similarly, like we used to have computers that were like humans that were like computing things by hand, right? But like then we got like computers or transistors that could help us build like calculators. And I think like history just kind of it obviously doesn't repeat itself, like, but it does rhyme. And I think like now we're like in a similar like major technological platform shift. And I think it'll be interesting to see what comes out at the other end. But I think what I could say for sure is that things will change, and they probably will change for the better, because every time we've had a big shift in technology, right, like it's always created more wealth for the world than it has taken away. So I think it's a very exciting future, and what a time to be alive.
Agree. Yeah. I love that. And I think, one thing humans have is this fascinating quality to be able to adjust to any environment we're in. As you mentioned, we've adjusted throughout the course of the history. And I think this is just another change. We'll be able to transform things around us and the way maybe how society works. And I truly hope for the better. And there's one question we love to ask guests on this podcast. And I think I'm going to ask you that as well. If there's something you believe about AI that you think the rest of the world doesn't quite see yet. So I'm going to hear for your controversial opinion.
So it would be great actually to have been asked this question 6 months ago, because 6 months ago, when we were out to pitch for our Series B, we were talking about multimodal, and a lot of people just thought we were crazy and be like, oh yeah, like multimodal AI systems are never gonna like amount to anything. Like the future is about language models. So that was like definitely a contrarian view at the time. I think with AI, like now, I think there is a big question around like the scaling loss, right? And like, okay, like, are they really like, are things like really starting to level out and like the scaling loss? I think, if you think about like the transformer architecture, it's an architecture now that is like from 2017. It's actually like got a few kind of years on its back, right? And I think to unlock the next big, set of developments in AI, like we probably do need to see like some innovation also at the model layer beyond like the transformer architecture. But it'll be interesting to see what happens in the sort of research community now. There are a lot of smart people, right, working on these types of problems. And a lot of AI labs now starting to like focus very specifically on like the reasoning problems and like math and all these things. So that'll probably like require some innovation on that front as well. So it's a fast moving space, and I think we're very excited to be part of it.
No, I totally agree. And I love to be on this journey with you and with Encord. And Ulrik, it's been such a pleasure hearing your insights and your thoughts and learning more about all the exciting work that's happening at Encord. And for our listeners who want to stay updated on Encord's latest development, news, blog posts, where can they go to learn more?
They can go to our website. So that's Encord.com, so ENCORD.com, or they can also follow us on Twitter on Encord_team, or they can find us a link as well. And we are always happy to chat about anything from AI development to business building.
Love that. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ulrik. We're looking forward to seeing exciting things Encord is going to do and how it's going to innovate and push boundaries in the AI space. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.